Hello, I'm Sarah Moore, Monitoring Consultant with the Infant and Toddler Connection of Virginia. And this is Part 3 in the documentation series for Part C Contact Notes, documentation that reflects your visit. Part 3 covers quality documentation. In Part 1, we learned that documentation paints the picture of the child and family's journey through early intervention. Our goal is documentation that will allow the reader to picture what happened in the visit being documented. The previous series covered a lot about the content of contact notes, but quality documentation is about more than content. What you say is equally important as how you say it. Remember, we said that one contact note builds upon the next to paint the big picture. Subsequent notes need to pick up where the last note ended, creating the story of a child and family's early intervention experience. Avoid repeating the same information from note to note. The documentation should be unique to the recorded visit and include supports and strategies used by the provider and the family or caregiver on that day, the child's response that day, and the short-term goals or outcomes that were addressed during that visit, as well as the child's progress or challenges. If you're using a note template that automatically lists all outcomes and goals, please be sure to indicate which ones were addressed during the session being documented. Your contact notes together contribute to the child's early intervention record. Altogether, they are comprehensive and collaborative, describing the child as a whole person, identifying those who support him, and describing how he is participating in his daily activities and routines. Many sources and a variety of informational resources contribute to the child's early intervention record. Your clinical judgment, ongoing assessment information, evidence-based practice, contact with team members and professionals beyond the infant and toddler connection should all be captured in your documentation. Documentation is rarely ever solely your perspective or your discipline-specific information. It's collective information that provides a picture of a child's overall development, their functioning, and family support. Parent report is so important to include. Parents know their child best. If they're asking for information, expressing a new concern, or providing observations of their child, their input should be included in your documentation. Your communication with other EI providers to seek support for providing services to a child and family should also be recorded. And in addition, please be sure to document any medical updates. When you review your documentation, keep in mind all possible readers. Who are all possible readers? EI documentation is read by service coordinators, other EI providers, family and caregivers, and other individuals supporting the child. Please keep in mind, early intervention documentation can be subpoenaed as part of legal proceedings. When you look at your documentation, consider the following questions. Is your note legible? A handwritten note can be very well written, but if it isn't legible, nobody knows what it says. Is what you're writing understandable by all team members, including the family? We may be tempted to use abbreviations or technical terms that are common to our discipline, but not all readers may be familiar with these. Not only do they confuse potential readers, but they portray the provider as the expert who has knowledge the reader doesn't. Are the events and observations recorded in a factual, non-judgmental way? Does what you write support a working relationship with the family or caregiver? Or could a potential reader be offended? And finally, what does your note reflect about you as a provider? This concludes part 3 of the documentation presentation. To apply what we've learned about quality documentation, review the contact note number 2 samples saved with this presentation. For each of these notes, ask yourself, what picture does this contact note paint? And what's problematic about this picture? And what would you change if you were the provider? The next section of this series covers documentation of coaching and additional documentation reminders. Thank you for joining us for part 3, and I hope you will continue to part 4.